This video will briefly explain how to fill out your financial declaration in your domestic relations actions where they're required. Now, as you can imagine, a divorce action is one of those, but it's also required in certain other domestic relations actions, such as actions for temporary separation, for separate maintenance, a parentage or paternity action, child support actions, child custody actions, and actions to modify orders in any of those particular kinds of cases. We're going to take you step by step through the pages of the Utah Court's official financial declaration forms and give you a little overview of why this is so important and how to make sure that you comply with the rules requiring a financial declaration and the instructions in the financial declaration form itself. I've just given you an excerpt from the rule that governs financial declarations out of Utah's Rules of Civil Procedure. Now, you can pause this video if you want to read the whole thing. Again, as I mentioned, the same information that's in Rule 26.1, that's the Rule of Civil Procedure governing financial declarations, that same information is in the instructions in the financial declaration form itself. But if you're the kind of person that worries about compliance or wants to make sure you understand what you're doing, you would be helped by reading this rule. But specifically, I want to draw your attention to this subparagraph F, talking about the sanctions that can be imposed if you don't comply with the rule for financial declarations. Failure to fully disclose all assets and income in your financial declaration and its attachments may subject the non-disclosing party to sanctions, which could include an award of the non-disclosed assets to the opposing party. It can also include a sanction of an award of attorney's fees or other sanctions as the court deems appropriate. So your financial declaration is very important, not only because you want to avoid sanctions, but you want to ensure that the court trusts you and finds you to be a credible, trustworthy person. And if you're going to be honest with the court about your income, your expenses, your assets, that sort of a thing, that can go a long way, not just in resolving issues of money and finances, but all the other issues in your case. This is page 1 of the official Utah Court's District Court's financial declaration form. And you'll see down here in the footer, if you look at this, this form gets changed from time to time as the rule changes or if they decide to add information that the courts find useful. And so this is a form that I did not make, but that the court itself tells people to fill out. I wanted to point this out to you on the first page only so that you can see there are instructions that go through page by page, paragraph by paragraph to help you fill it out correctly. The one thing I want to point out with these instructions on page 1 are that you don't have to file this document with the court unless the court commissioner or the judge assigned to your case is going to hold a hearing on financial issues, financial questions related to spouse support, as it says there, child support, the allocation of property or debts, and those sorts of financial issues where having the financial declaration in the court's hands will help it know the facts and make a determination as to what's fair. But as you see, we will go through pages 2 through 12. Now, in this case, I've added a few pages at the top, but as we go through each page, you'll see what the instructions are, and I will only point out those things that people often get wrong or people fail to do correctly. The rest I'll leave up to you. You can read each page on the video itself, or when you get your own financial declaration form, you can read those directions on the form itself. Here we are on the next page of the financial declaration where it continues with some initial instructions. Now, you can always pause this video to read those, or if you have the financial declaration form you're working on yourself, you can read through those pages. So I just want to highlight a few things, and I'll do that on each page as we go along. Some things will be quick and some things will be in more detail. As you're reading these instructions, keep this in mind. You'll notice it's asking for the tax returns for the last 2 tax years you filed taxes. So if you have not filed tax returns for the last year or two, you have to provide your most recent last 2 tax returns. Keep that in mind, and not just the returns themselves, but all of the documents that support that. Your W-2, your 1099, and all of your schedules that you reference or that you filled out in preparing that particular tax return. And if you're dealing with business interest, you have to provide that information and those documents too. You'll notice you have to provide pay stubs for the last 12 months before the petition was filed, not the last year's, full year's, calendar year's pay stubs, but you have to provide your pay stubs for the 12 months prior to the date of filing the petition. That covers not only your earned income, but also any evidence of unearned income. So if you're receiving money from an annuity or a trust fund, you also have to provide evidence of that. It's not just income from work that you have to report on your financial declaration. You also have to provide all loan applications and financial statements. So you have to, if you were applying for a mortgage, or you were applying to buy a car, or applying for a credit card, and you filled out a statement of your income, you have to provide a copy of that statement to the court to show what you were telling other people your income is. You have to provide documents about your real estate holdings, whether you own or have a lease interest or some other kind of interest in real estate. You have to show the appraisals you've had done for them. Even if they're out of date, you have to have the most recent appraisals. You have to have the tax valuation documents and anything you've filled out when refinancing or attempting to refinance. And then down here you have to have the last 3 months, not the last 12, but just 3 months of statements for your financial accounts. That would be, of course, your checking and savings, but also money market, certificates of deposit, brokerage, retirement, investment, and any other financial institution statement to show what kind of holdings you have, what kind of interest you might be earning, what your deposits and withdrawals are, and that sort of thing. If you cannot provide those documents and any of the other documents the financial declaration requires, you can't simply say, well, I just don't have them, couldn't find them. You have to tell the court you don't have them and that you haven't provided them with your financial declaration, and provide an explanation. We'll talk about that when we get to that paragraph. So here are the first two questions on this page. Your Social Security number. Now you'll notice that this is a Microsoft Word document that I'm working in, and you've got this blank. So it'll ask you to provide your Social Security number. If you were to write your Social Security number, and let's just assume that yours is just the number 5, 9 digits with all 5s. If you wrote it like this, you'd write, well, okay, it's 55555 5555. Okay, well, you have this line, you'll notice, that's still here. You don't have to let that stay there. And a lot of people, when they're filling out their financial declaration, will leave that there. You can just erase that. It looks a lot cleaner, it looks a lot better, and the court will not be upset if you erase that line if you're filling it out in your word processor. So, the other good news you'll also be happy to hear is that you don't have to provide your complete Social Security number. There are a lot of people that are very much afraid of identity theft. So the good news is that you can only, if you want, and I would think that everybody would, you only have to provide the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. So you can just provide the last 4 and the court will not be upset or think you're trying to hide anything, but just being cautious. You'll see the next question is your employment status, and again you've got this blank line. That line is there so that if you're filling it out by hand in a hard copy form, you can simply write it out with a pen or pencil. If you're going to type it up, just go ahead and erase it, and you can write that your occupation, in this case, if you were a plumber, you'd write, I'm a plumber. Then you go down, and if you don't have a job, you would click I am unemployed. But you also have to say who you're employed by, and you'll see these little gray check boxes. Now you'll find them throughout the financial declaration, and if you've never used these in Microsoft Word, you'll be a little surprised, because you would think, oh, okay, I'm going to fill these out in my word processor, so I'll just click, and I'm sure that a check or an X will appear in the box. So I've stated I'm a plumber, so I'm going to click on I am employed. Click. Click. You see that? It's not doing that. Well, maybe double clicking will work. What? Okay, well, it didn't give me a check or an X. It opened up a little dialog box, and now I have to look around. If you're not familiar with this, this is what you need to be aware of. See this where it says default value? It currently says it's not checked. You'll notice down here that this box is just gray but unchecked. So click this is called a radio button. Click the radio button and fill it in where it says checked, and then hit OK or enter, and you will see now that the box next to I am employed is checked. Let's assume that this plumber works for Acme Inc. So he'd just fill that out, or she would fill that out. And you've now completed the first couple of questions, and you know what to do when you're confronted with a line that you would normally fill in by hand with a pencil or pen. You can get rid of that line and just write the word. And now you know how to click boxes, which will be important because you'll see those coming up again and again on the pages that follow and in the paragraphs that follow. This is the next page of the financial declaration, and at the top it follows questions about your employment, where even though you've already stated where you're employed, you would write that again. And if you're self-employed, you would just write self, by the way. And in the previous page, if you're not working for Acme Inc., but you're self-employed, you would just write I am self-employed or self-employed. Wanted to point that out to you. But again, this particular plumber, in this instance, works for Acme Inc. If this company, Acme Inc., has subsidiaries or is doing business under other names or an other name, then you need to write that down. So even though Acme Inc. might be the person or the entity that writes your checks, if it goes by Plumbers wonderful, then you would write that down so that if there's any question as to, well, wait a minute, it says you work for Acme Inc., but your pay stub says Plumber's Wonderful or something like that, there will not be any confusion. Obviously, here you would write your address and telephone number for your employer. And if you have multiple jobs, that's why there are multiple boxes here. The next page, or rather the next paragraph, is going to ask for your gross monthly income by breaking it down line by line. All you have to do, if you're filling this out in your word processor, is fill this out. Now, I'm going to show you a nifty little trick as to how you can add up all of your gross income at the bottom of this form on the next page, but you have to make sure you're consistent if you're doing this in Microsoft Word. So, let's assume that from work you are making $3,000 a month. You'll notice that I like to put a comma after the 3 because that helps me to differentiate between $300 or $3,000 because that comma helps me clue in on that. I also might say that if I'm not receiving extra pennies, I would just put 00. If I do that consistently for every other line, I'll show you something that will allow me to add this up without having to break out a calculator or try to figure it out by tabulating it up by hand or forgetting to add a digit when I'm using a manual calculator. So let's assume I have no rental income. Am I just going to leave it blank? Well, you could, and the court won't be upset by that. But if I instead put a 0 there, this will tell me when I get to the bottom to tabulate everything up in Microsoft Word because it has an auto sum feature. As long as since I wrote a number in the first box under work, if I put a 0 here or a 0 and 0.00, this will allow Microsoft Word to add up every number. So let's say I'm going down there and I have work income of $3,000 and everything else are zeros. Well, if I already know that, I'm going to just copy and paste this in. I don't receive any interest income. I'm not receiving any dividends income from my investments, if I have any. I'm not retired yet, so I'm not receiving any retirement income. Workers' compensation. If you're getting it, of course, then you would want to fill that in, not leave it 0. Social Security disability, you might have seen that SSI or SSDI. Private disability insurance, well, I didn't break my leg, thank goodness, so I'm not receiving any of that. I'm not receiving Social Security, I'm not retired. I'm not unemployed, I'm not receiving unemployment benefits. I'm not receiving any kind of Pell Grant or some grant associated with school, so I would say 0 there. I'm not a veteran, but if I am a veteran receiving benefits, of course I would fill that in. Alimony. If for some reason you are receiving alimony from a previous marriage, and that can happen, or if you are receiving alimony under temporary orders in your current action, there's a difference. Alimony, as you can see, only would apply in your statement of gross monthly income if that's alimony you're receiving from a prior marriage, but not from the marriage that is the subject of this action for which you are preparing your financial declaration. So if you are not receiving alimony, or let me back up. If you're receiving alimony from your spouse on a temporary basis or something like that, in the divorce action you're going through right now, you don't fill that in. This is alimony you received from a prior marriage, if any. And fortunately that doesn't happen very often, so you don't have to fill that in or get confused. But don't write down alimony you're getting from the spouse you're divorcing now if you have a temporary order of alimony. Child support. Again, if you're receiving temporary child support in this action for which you are filling out the financial declaration right now, you report 0. That's only if you're getting, you would only fill this in if you're getting child support from a prior court order from a different court action. So most people will put 0 there. Payments from civil litigation. If you were in a car accident and receive monthly payments from a settlement or a judgment that you received in that, you would write that down. I've rarely seen that happen. Victim restitution is a special kind of financial benefit you receive if you were a victim of a crime, involved in a crime where the perpetrator was ordered to pay you back, or you qualified for some special aid through the state. Then you would write down how much money you're getting on a monthly basis. Public assistance, so if you're receiving welfare benefits and other things like that, where you're receiving money, then you would write that down. If you're receiving goods and services, you don't have to provide what the equivalent is unless the court wants to ask about that later. Support from household members would mean that if you live with a parent who pays you rent, or you live with an adult child, or you live with a roommate or a boarder or something like that where they are paying you rent, you would write that down. I'll just put 0 here. And support from non-household members, as I mentioned, that would be somebody like a renter or a boarder or something like that. Or just a benefactor who happens to be kind to you. Now I'm going to pause here so we can move on to the next page, but you'll see that paragraph 3 continues on the next page. After you've filled out all of the statements of your gross monthly income, then you would come to the next page and it would ask you what your total gross monthly income is, unless, of course, there are some other things that the previous paragraph 3 didn't ask for. In other words, it was asking for income from employment and income from people that may, household members that live with you, asking if you're getting government benefits or other things like that. But let's assume that there's another form of income that you're getting you don't feel falls into any of these categories, and that could be something such as trust income. It's unearned income. And remember, gross monthly income does not mean just the money you earn. It's any income from any source. So let's assume that you're in a family that has been paying out to you $200 per month out of a family trust. You would write that down, and then you'll notice over here it asks you to describe that. So you would just write, let's assume that it's just the Fenster Wall Family Trust. That's all you have to say. Or you could write, in case you want to be clearer, income from Fenster Wall Family Trust I receive monthly. Okay. You don't have to try and fill in every blank, so unless you want to use the AutoSum feature, which I'll talk about now. So I'm not receiving money from any other source. Now, because I've been consistent and put a number next to every $sign in every cell of this table, I can come down here, and without going into detail as to how this works, let me just tell you that you can go to the Layout tab on Microsoft Word, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to perform that calculation now, but if you have any questions and want me to show you how this is done, just give me a call if you can't figure it out by using the help screens or the helps in Microsoft Word itself. So you're going to see a couple of things appear on this page, but in the background I'm going up here. Let me describe what I've done. I go to the Layout tab in the tool bar above. I click on that, and the last thing you'll see on the ribbon at the end, on the far right, is a letter F and X. And then you'll see under that formula. I click that, and it will ask me what I want to do. The default formula is just to add everything up, to give me the sum. So it will give me that as my default formula. I click OK, and look what it does. It gives me $3,200. And remember, I had no income other than $3,000 from my employment and $200 from this trust, so it tabulated it correctly. And it gave me $2 signs, but that's easy enough. I'll just erase that. And now I don't have to worry about making a mistake. Now the problem here is that if I didn't write consistently the same numbers in the same format, you'll notice I had a 0.00 each time. I didn't leave anything blank. If you leave something blank, then Microsoft Word will treat that line where there's a blank as the end, and it will not include things below that. So you have to make sure that if you have no income, write 0. Not only is that clearer for the court, but it also allows you to use this nifty sum feature in Microsoft Word. I didn't have to open up Excel. I didn't have to create a spreadsheet. It just has the same functionality. So it's kind of a useful thing, and will give you peace of mind so you don't have to keep trying over and over again and ask your best friend to double check your work. You'll notice the next thing on paragraph 3 is if you don't have any income to explain. Again, you come to that checkbox. I'll show you once again. I can't single click it. I have to double click it. It will bring up the dialog box. I check the radio button for checked. Click enter or OK, and it will check the box. Now, because I'm employed, I wouldn't do that, but this bore repeating. So I can go back and fix that. If you have no income, this is where you can explain, but once again, these are lines that you can see the word processor provides for people filling it out by hand. If you want to fill that out yourself, just highlight those and erase them, and you could write, I have no income because I am independently... Well, I'm sorry I'm having such a difficult time writing on this example. I'm independently wealthy and don't need income. Okay, now you can say all sorts of other things. You could say, I have no income because I am unemployed. But you do have to write down something in there to explain that. Now, obviously, if you're not going to check the box, I wouldn't recommend you get rid of the lines, because the court is used to looking at this form and seeing consistently the same thing. Leave them blank. You can just simply undo. If you don't know how to do that, you can just do this a couple of times, undo until you get back to the original. Monthly tax deductions are the next paragraph. And see that in this parenthesis section, you'll see that there's a tiny instruction set to help you understand what you're talking about. These are deductions required by law. I'm not going to read the whole thing again. You can pause and read this yourself or refer to it in the form itself, but it gives you instructions as to exactly what you're supposed to do, and in some cases tells you where to find the information that you're providing. So in this situation, let's assume that for my monthly tax deductions, my federal income tax is $213 that's being withheld for federal income tax purposes. Let's assume that it's $46 for state purposes. I may not live in a city or a county where there are any municipal income taxes. So once again, if I want to take advantage of the Microsoft Word sum feature, I'm going to write 0, because if I leave it blank, the sum feature won't work. FICA, let's assume that's $38, and Medicare is $42. Now, I don't claim to be any kind of tax genius, so if these numbers are making you laugh, remember I'm just using them as placeholders, but I would look at my I would look at my pay stub to find this information. If you don't know how to read your pay stub, and by the way, let me just tell you that I'm one of the first who would admit to that. I didn't really look at my pay stubs before I became a divorce lawyer, because I thought, it's what they paid me, why am I ever going to complain about it, and if they are taking advantage of me, I don't have the ability or the time or the interest to fight the man. Now, if you don't understand how to read your pay stubs because you're like me, learn how to read them. The court will not tolerate you simply making up numbers or taking a stab or leaving this blank. And you'll remember at the beginning of this video, if you don't provide the court with the information that you don't have, and you're not honest and forthcoming and complete, you can end up losing financial disputes and having them ruled in favor of your spouse because you simply didn't cooperate. So make sure you understand this. If you don't, go talk to somebody in your human resources department. If you have a friend or family member who's an accountant or an employer who understands that, or who happens to be a lawyer that understands that, find out. It's not rocket science. Again, if you're like me, sometimes the numbers just confuse you and discourage you and make you feel stupid. But this is no time for you just to make up numbers or take a stab or leave it blank, because you will get in trouble, and the court will look upon that as being deceptive and lazy, or not taking the process seriously. All right, we've gone down here. I've written all this down. I'm going to use that nifty trick. I'm going to go to the layout in the toolbar above. I'm going to click on Formula, and it gives me $339. It gave me one too many dollar signs, so I'm going to move that, and I'm finished. Now I go down to net monthly income. Well, as you can see, if my gross income is $3,200, and my deductions for tax purposes are $339, then I'm just going to take $3,200, and I will have a calculator handy when I start to do some of these things. I'll take $3,200. Now, if you can do this in your head, that's wonderful, but I'll do $3,200 minus $339, and that gives me a net income, which I'm going to write down first, of $2,861. Now, look at that. This line didn't move as I typed, because this is something that's been put into a form. So if you find that you can't erase that and don't have any need to erase it, just leave it the way it is. So my gross monthly income, now I'm going to write that down, was $3,200. My total monthly tax deductions, which is right up here, is $339, and my net income is $2,861. Paragraph 6 follows on this page and on to the next page. So as you can see, it'll ask for my home address, 1234 5th Street. And then I would also give the city, state, and zip. The reason that's important is for many reasons. By the way, I do not live at 1234 5th Street, and I'm just making up the zip code. But you need to provide a complete address because the court once again will want to make sure that you're being completely forthcoming. Let me show you what follows on the page below by simply doing a break here. I'm going to break and bring that down to the next page so you can see the entire paragraph. So it's asking me the home address and then the date it was acquired. So let's assume that it was just acquired on January 5th or 4th, 2010. Again, those little gray check boxes. In whose name? See that there? It's asking whose name it's in. Is it in my name? Am I the petitioner? Am I the respondent? Or is it in the name of both? Well, if I'm the only owner and I'm the person who filed for divorce, I would simply click that checkbox and fill it in. If it's in my and my spouse's name, and she's the respondent, I would click both of them. And if it's in the name of my spouse and me and perhaps one of our parents, I would click that box as well. Okay, you'll notice I don't have to identify who it is, but I certainly can. And if next to other, I would write petitioner's mother. That's about all the space you have. Okay, so if it's going to be all those, rarely will you find somebody that will check all three boxes. But if you do, that's fine. And you want to make sure that you don't just say, well, I'm an owner, so I'll click that box and I'll leave the other ones blank. Because if your mother is an owner, that's what the court wants to know about, because you want to protect your mother's interests. And if your wife or husband is a co-owner, you want to click that simply to be fair so that you don't confuse the court. You'll tell the court how much you originally paid, $232,000, and then you'll talk about the current value. Now, I am making this video in 2015, so the real estate market is finally turning around. So rather than a lot of people who just a few years ago may have purchased their house for more than it's worth, fortunately this couple has a house with some equity in it. So the current value is $250,000. We would then identify who the mortgage holder is. You'll notice that it centers that. So let's just say that that one is the Last National Bank. I bought it for $232,000, but I did put down a modest down payment. So the amount, and I've paid for it for a few years, so the amount I owe at this point is around $200,000. What I mean is a round number, not approximately. You can write that down. If you don't know exactly what it is, although I can't imagine how you couldn't find that information, you can simply write est for estimate. But that's only if you really don't know and can't find out by simply inquiring with your lender. So let's go down to monthly payments here. My monthly payment, let's assume, is $1,100. I got a pretty good rate, didn't I? If I have a second mortgage, I would write that down. Let's assume that I do, and I would call that the Federal Credit Union. Again, I would talk about how much I owe and what the monthly payments are. If I have other real property, a second home, a vacation home, even a timeshare, or if I rent my office building or something like that because I'm self-employed or something like that, that's where I would write this down on the second part. Now let's assume that I have more than 2 interests in real property, that I actually own 3 or 4 or 5 homes. What can I do? Well, I could add another page, or I could simply do this. If I'm filling this out in Microsoft Word, I would highlight this table. I could either do it by manually doing that, or you'll see this little cross with the plus signs at the end, so to speak. I can click on that, and I can simply copy the entire table. And then what I can do is come down right beneath there before I get to paragraph 7 and just paste that in. Now you'll see that it's B. I'll need to change that to C because I've got real property A, real property B, and then real property C. So I'd want to put that in there and make sure I don't, if I'm copying it, I don't want it to say A, B, B, B. You get the idea. I'm going to just, as I said, undo that because in this example, this couple only has one house. Then we'll move on to paragraph 7, where we identify personal property. Now, if you don't know the difference between real property and personal property, I'll just be really brief. Real property is land and the structures built on land. So you'll hear real estate. It's also the term for real property. So real property is not just your house, but it's the land and your house, or your land, your house, and the barn that's built on it, or land and the house and the well housing, or any of those sorts of things. That's real property. But then personal property is basically everything else. That would be furniture and cars and livestock and money and things like that. So after you've gone through your real property interests, you now have to identify your personal property. And this financial declaration asks you to do so by listing things in a particular order. It starts with vehicles, and you'll notice it will not just ask you to say that I drive a Honda Accord. You have to say, or even worse, a Honda. Make sure that you say that you drive a 2011 Honda Accord, because that way you've given the year, the make, and the model. And then the lien holder, again, let's assume that you also have your trustee credit union covering that, so it's Federal Credit Union. You'd identify not only the lien holder by name, but you'll notice the address is requested. Oh, but I don't know the address of my Federal Credit Union branch or something like that. Well, that's fine. You can either go to your loan statement and look that up, or you can call them on the phone, because that's easily found. So let's just assume that these guys are located at 200 West 3040 South in Salt Lake City, pardon me, Utah 84111. In whose name? If it's a loan that my spouse and I both took out, I would check both boxes. If it's just me, I would check the one box. If it's just the respondent, my wife in this case, I'd check another box. Now, what if it's in somebody else's name? Well, it'd be kind of odd for you to be the owner of a car that is encumbered by a loan that is in somebody else's name. But if that happened, once again, don't be shy about simply copying that checkbox, pasting it in, and writing my mother. You could write also other my mother if you wanted to, and check that box. Be as clear as you can so the court understands who has interests in this property, so that you or the people that have the interests don't get burned. I'm going to go through next, and, well, let me do this first. Let's assume that this is the car I drive, so I'm going to click that box. I'm going to check it. I'm going to say the current value is $2,500. The amount owed, let's assume that I own it, I've had it a while, is 0, so I have 0 payments. If my wife is driving, and I know some of you are going to say I'm a sexist, but hey, I'm just trying to be realistic in how this happens for a lot of people. So I drive the Accord, but of course, what does the wife drive? The Honda Odyssey. Did I spell that right? I don't think I did. Well, spell check didn't catch it for me. Again, it's financed with the Federal Credit Union. We buy all of our cars there in this family, or finance all of our cars through them. And this one, even though we're kind of a little non-traditional, that one's the one my wife drives, so the loan is in her name. It's well, actually, she doesn't drive a 2011. She drives a 2015, so that has a much higher value. Let's say it's $19,000. Let's see. Not if it's a Honda Odyssey. Let's say that it's $30,000, and the amount that's owed on it is $450 a month. Oh, excuse me. That's $450 a month. Let's see, the amount that's owed on it is $24,000, and the amount owed is $450 a month. Write that in. Then, as you can see, you go down and you have other personal property. It even gives you a helpful hint. Vehicles, boats, trailers, major other equipment, motorcycles, three-wheelers, any kind of document, any kind of other thing like that. For example, let's assume that you've also financed your furniture or your television or your sound system from R.C. Willey. You would write that down. Just say that you have your bedroom suite. R.C. Willey is the lien holder. You would show that it's in both of your names if that's what you did. Current value. Now, by the way, used bedroom suits probably have almost no value at all, so don't be surprised if you bought it for $5,000 and it's only worth $500, so you're still owing $3,700 on it with monthly payments of $210. Okay, I'm not going to fill the whole thing out again, and then what I'll do is pause here so I can prepare you for the next couple of paragraphs in the next slide. Paragraph 8 covers business interests. So if you own a business or an interest in a business with you and your brother, or you and your parents, or you and a partner, you would have to fill that out. I'm not going to do that because that rarely comes up, frankly, with most of my clients, but it'd be self-explanatory to this point because you've done other things similar. You would write the name of the business, the address and phone number, the nature of the business. If it's a plumbing business that you decided to open instead of working for Acme Inc., you would write plumber or accountant or quilt making or whatever it is you do. Once you get to the percentage owned, if this is a business that you and your spouse own together, which does come up from time to time, here you go. Oh, there's that Microsoft Word line thing. If I write that I own 100% of a business, it's going to give me that weird line. Just get rid of it. Okay? If my wife and I are partners and we're 50-50 partners, which almost never happens, but we might have one of them 51% and the other at 49%, just simply write that in. Does your business have any value? It might, but what if you and your family run a little janitorial business on the side to help a child in college, or if you're living in Utah and you have a child on a mission, which is very common. You may be doing things like that where you don't know the value of your business. If you don't, just put unknown. If you never bothered to find out, or that business is temporary or only ekes out a few $100s a month, it might not have any value to somebody that might buy it. But if it's something that's been in the family a while, or you and your spouse have built this up from some great internet investment or something like that, and it has a value and you know what it is, feel free to say what it's worth. So let's assume that it's worth $1 million. If it's $1 million, you can say that. If you think it might be, go ahead and write est or estimated, because you don't want to commit yourself to saying it's worth $1 million if you're not certain and can show that by referring to documentation or other evidence of that. But let's say that in this case, you and your spouse, you're fairly certain you and your spouse would both agree that this is worth $1 million. That's how you'd fill out business interests. All right, financial assets in the next paragraph, paragraph 9. You'll notice, again, like the personal property table, it sets it out not only in rows but in columns. So the first assets they want to know about are bank or credit union accounts. So let's assume that we've got an account number with my favorite credit union, Federal. By the way, Federal Credit Union, if it's a real thing, I'm just making up a name. I don't actually have an account with Federal Credit Union, but we're going to use that hypothetically in this example. If it's Federal Credit Union, I would simply write down my account number. But wait, if I want to keep my account safe from prying eyes, what can I do? Once again, you could simply write last 4 digits and then just provide the last 4 digits if you're worried about identity theft or somebody raiding your account. You'll give the account number, the name and address of the financial institution, and then identify who are on the account. Again, it could be you, your spouse, it could be you, your spouse, and someone else, and you need to check those boxes. You'll see this line here. That's where you can, if you're wondering what this line is for, that's because if you identify other, it's supposed to be the name of that person. So that would be my mother. I see that? There's that line again. So what do? Just erase it and move on. If I'm going to, let me just click these really quick. You will also notice that if I'm going to click a lot of boxes, I could simply click them all, or I could copy and paste them, which I'm doing now. And let's say there's a balance of $3 in that account. Yes, you may think that's not a lot, and that fluctuates, right? You could write current balance, and if you want to make sure that that can go up and down, and you don't want to look like you're lying when you say $3 today, when 6 months later it says 300,000, you would just say as of today, by the way, is March 21st, 2015. So you can just write that down. Again, showing you're being honest and showing that that fluctuates. That could do you some good. Don't have to do it that way, but it wouldn't hurt. Your other assets then in paragraph 9, as you can see, started out with bank or credit card, credit union. If you have only one, you can leave the other one blank. You don't have to fill it out just because it's asking. It's not as though this form is saying it expects you to have multiple bank or credit union accounts. Stocks, bonds, securities, retirement. If you get to retirement, you'll notice it asks for the account number, the plan name, and the plan representative. I can't tell you how many times when I have a client fill this out, they just simply don't bother to find out what this information is. Do it. It's going to come up eventually. If you have a retirement account, you're going to have to provide at some point, as long as it's divided between you and your spouse, the plan name and the plan representative. You're going to need to know the name and address of the institution, the names on the account, and the current balance. So you should find it out sooner than later. Not only is it going to help you down the road, but again, it shows the court that you're taking your case seriously and providing the information when it's called for. You'll notice these other provisions: profit sharing plan, annuities, money owed to parties. That means money that is owed to the parties, meaning you and your spouse, not money that you owe to other people. So if you have money that is owed to you, you can say that money is owed to me, and even though it says name of institution, it's just because it's part of a form and they couldn't break this out separately. So you could say, I am owed $5,000 from my Uncle Louis. Okay, you would say, I'm the one that's owed the money. That's what that means here. And then you could say the current balance. Well, let's say that Louis owes you $5,000 and Louis, despite his best efforts, has only paid you $50 so far. Cash, same thing. Cash on hand is what you have. Going down to the next page. Life insurance. Most people do not have life insurance policies that have cash value. So you don't, if you have a term life insurance policy, then you would put 0 if in fact it has no value. Again, don't take what I'm saying in this hypothetical as telling you what to write. I'm telling you how to fill it out when you have the facts in hand for your situation. You identify your life insurance by, in this case, although it says account number, that would probably mean policy number in this case. Again, you'd identify the institution or the insurer by name and address, the names on the policy or account, the face value, and cash value. If you are insured for $1 million and you have some kind of universal or whole life policy and its cash value is a fraction of the face value, you would write them both down. And then, of course, you have other assets. Again, if for some reason your assets are more extensive than what this pre-printed form provides, what can you do? You can add additional lines, and you can simply take this one right here when it goes to other, highlight the whole thing, and let's assume that you actually have 3 other things you want to identify. You can fill that in, and boom! When you paste it in, you can then identify each new object. All right, you've moved on to paragraph 10, debts. I'm going to be a little shorter now because you're starting to get the hang of this, but keep in mind a couple of things you should always do as you're going through each paragraph. Read what paragraph 10 is asking for. Debts do not include the amount owed on property reported in paragraphs 7 and 8. So you've already told the court in paragraphs 7 and 8 that I have a debt related to my home mortgage. I've already told the court that I owe money on my car. I don't write this down again. This is where I would write down other debts that I have not identified previously in the previous paragraphs. So I could mention that I have a debt owed to, and I happen to know there are 1 million people in the state of Utah that owe a debt to Capital One. I'm not going to comment on why that is, but I see a lot of Capital One credit cards, and you could simply write, as it says there under purpose of debt, see, credit card, cash loan, installment payment, just write credit card. You may, by the way, want to say Capital One Visa, or something like that, if that helps. In whose name, let's assume that this is the petitioner who's filling this out throughout, so I'm going to say it's in the petitioner. The amount that's owed, $7,700, and the monthly payments are $142. And then you'll notice that you can also put down not just your debts, but you can also put down your spouse's debt. See, that's why it has both petitioner and respondent there. You'll want to give an extensive description to the court of just how much debt this family is dealing with. Not just you, but your spouse as well. Sometimes you might think, well, I don't want the court to know how in hoc my spouse is. That means I might have to pay a lot of alimony. You can leave that to yourself as to whether you need to identify your debts as strictly your debts personally, or if you consider the debts of your spouse to be a marital or family debt, you can do that too. There are pluses and minuses, advantages and disadvantages to both of those. Unfortunately, this financial declaration doesn't tell you which of those you should do. If I were doing this, I would err on the side of making sure I identify as many debts as possible, and then being as detailed and precise in identifying who the debtor is, because if you're not aware of this, and I'll briefly explain, Marital debt can be debt that you and your spouse incur together by signing a loan application together, but it can also be debt that your spouse went out and ran up without you even knowing about it if that debt was incurred during the marriage. I won't talk about that any further than just to be aware of options you have for identifying debts. Okay? Let's move down to monthly expenses, and just to make this a little easier, I'm going to put this entire paragraph 11 onto the next page and scroll down there so you can see this. And we will now talk about paragraph 11 separately. I have formatted paragraph 11 to fit on one page. It does not fit on one page typically in the form as it appears, as it was written by the Board of District Court Judges, but for the purpose of showing you everything that's in paragraph 11, I've fitted on this one page. So don't be shocked if it doesn't show up this way on your form. All right, monthly expenses. Again, look at the short description of the instructions right there. Include the amounts other than taxes withheld from your paycheck. So you'll notice there's no expense where you can talk about what's withheld for tax purposes. Do not add that in because that's already been taken account of up above. For expenses that change from month to month, calculate the annual total and divide by 12. So if you have gasoline expenses that can go up and down depending upon how much you're traveling from month to month, take as many months as you can find for the last 12 up to the last 12 months and average those out. If you're spending $300 one month, $100 the next, and then let's say $200 the next month, what would you have there? You'd have 300 plus 100 plus 200. You'd have, 300 plus 100 plus 200, and you would divide that by 3. You'd say my average is $200. So you'd write down what your mortgage is. We remember from up top that we knew it was $1,100. Now we'll go through this whole thing. This is a little tedious, but I want you to see how this works because once again, when you get down to the total, you can use in Microsoft Word that sum feature, which is so handy. That you'll go through and you've got your real property taxes of $600 and your real property insurance that we think is each month $111, real property maintenance. Let me pause here to tell you that this is where a lot of people, when they're desperate to say, I don't want to show that I have a lot of money to pay in alimony, or when they want to say, I'm desperate to show that I deserve a lot of alimony, people go wild. Does anybody really know how much money they spend on real property maintenance? The answer is no. I have yet to find anybody that actually kept track of that by holding on to receipts or keeping a ledger. So how much do the courts generally allow you to have? Oh, probably in the 2-figure range, and I'm not talking $99. I'm talking $25 or $30. So if you're saying that you're spending a lot more than $25 a month on your real property maintenance, be prepared to show that. Now, you always should. If you're one of those fuss budgets that kept every receipt for every soda and every parking spot you ever went to, well, if you're getting divorced, I can tell you all your hard work is going to pay off now because most people do not document their expenses, and so they're open season for challenge. If I want to tell somebody, I don't think you're really spending $25 a month on real property maintenance, there's a good chance the court might believe me because you can't prove it. So make sure you're being reasonable when you fill this in. Food and household supplies, $300. You might want to say $350 depending upon what the truth is. Clothing, that's another area where people go hog wild, and you'll see people say things like $600 a month. Well, if you're somebody that needs a lot of clothing or replaces a lot of clothing or has to buy a lot of expensive clothing, that might be correct, but be prepared to prove it because most people won't believe that you spend $600 a month. I'm not saying that you should put these numbers in because depending upon how big your family is, your food budget can fluctuate wildly. I'm not telling you to put any of these figures in. These are hypotheticals. Let's assume that somebody pays about $600, not per month, but per year. That would be $50 a month for clothing. Laundry and dry cleaning. Again, I don't know how much I spend on laundry and dry cleaning, and I'm a lawyer. I wear suits. I have my shirts pressed at the dry cleaners. My wife takes them there for me, and I'm very grateful, but I don't know how much it is. Let's just assume it's $1,500, or 15, not $1,500, 15 for this purpose. An automobile loan. Here's another place where people will do something weird. Let's assume, and as you remember, I drive a Honda Accord, that's 2011. I do not really drive a Honda Accord. But in this hypothetical, I'm also a plumber in this hypothetical, not a lawyer. in this hypothetical, I say that my car is paid off. Am I going to put down that my loan is going to be $450 because I anticipate I'm going to need a new car in the future? People do that all the time. Most judges and commissioners don't like that. They don't like people saying, I'm going to state as an actual expense, and as an expense that I do not in actuality have, but think that I might or hope that I might have. If you don't have an automobile loan now, my feeling is you should be honest and say 0. Other lawyers will tell you, well, if your car is 10 years old, it's on its last legs, and it's pretty clear you're going to have an automobile loan sooner than later, like it or not, they will put down, a loan amount that they think is reasonable for the kind of car you're going to replace. I am not telling you which one you should do, but I tend to say that if you don't have an automobile loan now, you shouldn't state that you do. You shouldn't claim that you've got one in the future when you don't have one now. Put down 0. If you were to say that your car really is falling apart, and you really were just days or weeks or months away from getting a new car, and you know what that's going to be, and you know what you can afford, and you know it's $450, I would put down $450, and I would say estimated amount for replacement vehicle. At least you're letting the court know that this is not an actual expense, but an anticipated near future expense. Automobile insurance. Okay, you write that down, $60. Automobile gasoline, $200. Again, I'm not telling you that everybody has a $200 monthly gasoline expense. You'd be surprised what some people do when they watch these videos and they think, well, I'm just simply following what this guy told me to do on the video. No, if you don't have an automobile gasoline expense, don't write down $200. I'm just giving hypotheticals. Maintenance, $73. Public transportation, 0. Electricity. Go ahead and look at your bills to find out these numbers. Gas, water, sewage and garbage, telephone. If you have a cell phone, you'd put that together. If you have multiple cell phones for the family. Paid television, $80. Internet, $120, depending upon, or 12, let's do that. Garnishments, if you're being garnished because you've got a lawsuit against you or somebody's trying to collect on a judgment, you would fill that in. I rarely see that. Alimony, again, if you're paying alimony from a prior marriage, write that down. Now, by the way, I know the guy only makes $3,000, but let's be fair. $200 alimony. Child support from a prior order. Let's assume that this is the second marriage, and the child support is $412. Child care, if you've got little kids and you're paying while both you and your spouse go to work or something like that. If you're paying child care on a monthly basis, let's assume that you're getting pretty decent child care, $300. Education for children. You'll notice it's children, my friends, not education for you. So don't write down an education expense for a child if it's for you. And don't write down, just like I talked about that fictitious future car you don't pay for, just because you're getting divorced does not mean you can suddenly want your kids to go to private school when they don't, or get that tutor for your child when that child doesn't have one. So if you don't have special, and I'm not talking about special ed for mentally challenged students, I'm talking about if you don't have special education expenses for your children, don't make them up. But if, for example, you've got a school that has a $10 a month craft charge or something like that, then go ahead and put that down. Let's just say education for yourself. Once again, this is something that a lot of people, and let's face it, most of the people seeking alimony are still women in 2015. They will say, I need to go back to school, even though I want alimony and I've been out of the workforce for a while, or whatever the situation is, I need education. I don't have it now, but I'm going to need to pay for education in the future. Or if you're the man saying, well, I want to get my master's degree, and especially now that I'm getting divorced, I may have some additional financial obligations, or I'm finally getting that taste of freedom I always wanted. Whatever your reason, you cannot put down that you have an educational expense that you don't actually have. But if you're going to do that because it was in the works, or because you think you've got a very good argument for, I'm getting back out into the workforce after being a stay-at-home parent for 20 years, you've got to explain that. So once again, let's assume that you were going to have a $500 a month education expense, and it's not happening yet. I would write anticipated, or expected, or if I get into to the nursing program. Make sure you're letting the court know that this is a future expense, not an actual expense. You may also want to go over here and put an asterisk next to it or something like that, and then down here in the bottom, put the asterisk and write, this is not an actual but an anticipated expense. Because these are things the court can take into account as an expense, even though it may not be a current expense, but you don't want to try to, and it happens a lot. There are some really unscrupulous lawyers out there that will make up expenses to make it harder to pay alimony if they're trying to avoid alimony payments, or to get bigger alimony awards if somebody's trying to get alimony. Moving right along. And remember, got to make sure I fill everything in so I can use that sum feature in Microsoft Word. Extracurricular activities for children. Don't decide you want to enroll your children in horse riding lessons, equestrian activities, if they've never done it before, and then try to claim that as an expense. Healthcare insurance premiums. Healthcare expenses that aren't covered by your insurance premiums themselves. If you've got a prescription each month. Other insurance. You might be paying for disability insurance and you have a premium each month. Or you might have other kinds of insurance that aren't included in your health care. So go ahead and put that down. Credit cards. Remember, now even though you've already written down what your credit card payments were up above, you'll still want to write that in here because it is a monthly expense. Now, by the way, if you have a credit card with a $40 balance on it and your monthly payment is $40, are you going to put down $40 for your credit card? Or even better, if you have a $400 balance and you pay $178 a month, are you going to put down that you have a $178 a month credit card payment? Well, you could with a straight face write that down. But if you're going to pay off your $400 credit card balance at $178 a month, that's going to be gone in just a matter of 2 or 3 months. I would mention zero, unless of course I always have a $400 balance that I always keep because I keep increasing. Every time I pay something off, I add more debt. But make sure that your monthly expenses have to be expenses that you are constantly paying, month to month to month, year in and year out. So keep that in mind. Let's assume, though, that you do have a $120 credit card payment. Union dues, let's say you do, and that's $5 a month. 401k, again, if you're not contributing to a 401k at the time the divorce action is filed, it doesn't do you any good, and I won't go into why. But generally, starting to save in a 401k isn't going to do you much good in the future. You can try it if you want to, but the court's going to say, well, that's interesting. Why are you claiming to contribute to your 401k or other retirement fund now when you've never done that in the past? Or if you're the person that is asking for alimony, saying, well, I'm going to need alimony so I can start building up retirement, that's a completely different kettle of fish. But just be honest, if it's not an expense that you've historically had, or not an expense that is new but necessary because of a health problem or some other need that has arisen, don't make up expenses. I guess I should have said that at the beginning. The long and the short of it is, be honest with your actual expenses, and remember, you have to attach proof of what your expenses are, and the more you can do that, the more seriously those expenses will be taken by the court and less prone to being rejected or adjusted by the court, who is just being skeptical of your claims. Savings and savings plan contributions, if you've been doing that historically, tell the court that's what you do. Don't start doing it now unless you expect to be looked upon with some skepticism. That is not legal advice I'm giving. I'm simply explaining to you that that's something you ought to keep in mind. Okay. Entertainment, once again, people will try to claim they have extraordinarily high entertainment so that they can pay less alimony or get more alimony. Just be honest as about what it is. Some people have high entertainment expenses. Some people do virtually nothing. It's their idea of entertainment is going to the library so they don't have to spend any money. Just be honest. I'm just putting 200 in there. I'm not saying that's what you should have, or more or less. Donations. Again, that's an interesting matter. When there's not enough money to go around to continue making your donations and pay alimony, then sometimes, even if it's something you've been paying all your life, the court can determine that donations are not made if that means that money is freed up to pay as alimony. But if your LDS, as so many people in the state of Utah are, they are asked to tithe 10% of their income. So, there's no actual statement as to whether it should be gross or net. People have their own opinions on it. But let's assume that this guy who's making $3,200 a month in earned and unearned income is tithing to his Mormon church or some other church. Many churches will do a tithing. He's paying $320 a month in donations. Gifts. I don't know anyone that gives a gift every single month without fail, including myself, but I do know that I regularly give gifts at Christmas time and at each one of my child's and spouse's birthdays, and maybe my mom and dad, that sort of a thing. So I would then average what I spend on gifts for the entire year, and let's assume that I determined that the amount that I would spend on average is $100. Okay, if I have other expenses that aren't listed here, for example, that they're not related to my health care or something like that, but I also like to race Ferraris or something like that, and that cost is $400 a month. I would call that my Ferrari Racing Club dues. Okay, you might think, well, wouldn't that fit under entertainment? Yeah, you could do that. I could leave this blank and just make entertainment $600 instead of $200. But by breaking it out, I can show, well, entertainment is kind of my evenings out, my dinners, my desserts, my movies, my plays, things like that. But my Ferrari Racing Club is more of an avocation or a hobby. You can do that. I would say that hobbies and entertainment can overlap, but may not necessarily be the same thing at all times. I'm going to come down here, use my nifty Microsoft Word sum feature, and there it is. Wow, I spend more money than I earn. Is that unusual? Not in the United States of America. And certainly not unusual in divorce, especially if you happen to be the spouse seeking alimony. You may earn substantially less than what your expenses are because up to this point you've been relying on your spouse to help supplement your financial needs through his or her earnings. We are almost at the end, so now we're in paragraphs 12 and 13. You'll remember that if you did not have evidence for every one of your expenses, this is where paragraph 12 comes in. Some people do not keep track of their gasoline expenses. Some people have a gas card or they use their credit or debit card for all their gasoline and they can estimate it down to they can declare it down to the penny. Other people have to estimate. Other people don't keep their register tapes from the grocery store. In that situation, you would write down, whether it's paragraph 11 or anywhere else, you would write down where your estimated amount came from. If you have a debt that you actually don't know how much it is or how much you're paying, which is unusual but can happen, that's what paragraph 12 is for. As you can see, any amount that you estimated, you identify what paragraph the estimate occurs in, what the item estimated was, the amount that you estimated, and why you came up with that. If you estimated that your gasoline expenses were $200 a month, you would state in that box, under basis for estimation, my car gets 30 to 40 miles per gallon. I drive an average of 200 miles a week, and this is how much I spend on gasoline when I go to the pump at the average price of $2.30. And remember, this is March 2015 when I made this, so if things have changed radically in the future, don't laugh. But you're saying, oh, $2.15 or $2.40 a gallon. This is how much I estimated because this is what I normally travel, and that's why I put down my gasoline expense as being X number of dollars. Paragraph 13 comes up next. Remember, if you don't attach supporting documents that are required by Rule 26.1 and as instructed in the financial declaration, you have to state what documents in the left column, what documents I did not provide because they're not available to me, and here's why they aren't available to me. So, if you've got a lame excuse for why you didn't provide a document you didn't have but could have gotten because you can get a copy somewhere easily, I would just go get the copy rather than say, I don't have it because it's at my house and my spouse is there and I moved out. If your spouse won't give you a copy of your taxes or other important documents, that could be a legitimate excuse. But remember, you can ask for a copy of your income tax returns from the IRS in the state of Utah. And if you're early on in the procedural stages of your case, just go get a copy as opposed to whining about how you couldn't get your hands on them. Another good example of that is bank statements. My bank statements are all in my house and I'm not there anymore. My spouse is there and I won't, and he or she won't give them to me. Well, by the way, I do sympathize. That's too bad and that is irritating. And if you're one of those people that has all the documents and you think that you're clever or enjoying vengeance by not sharing, come on, they're joint tax returns. And even if there's some different documents that are yours and yours alone, or only relate to certain things that are going to come out in the course of discovery one way or the other, or initial disclosures. So get the documents if you can. If it's extraordinarily expensive or time-consuming or terribly difficult, that's where you write down in paragraph 13, I don't have the documents and I have a good excuse. Look at the bottom of this page. You are declaring under the penalty of perjury that the information you provide in your financial declaration is complete and accurate to the best of your knowledge, and that you've done the best to provide an accurate picture to the court, and that you've fully disclosed everything to the best of your ability. Once that's done, if you're representing yourself, you would actually physically sign and date that, and then submit that to your spouse with a certificate of service being filed with the court saying, I'm not filing my financial declaration with the court. Perhaps you are, but if you're not, I didn't file my financial declaration, but I am telling you, Your Honor, that I did serve a copy of my complete financial declaration on my spouse on this date and time. But in your financial declaration itself, you are declaring under criminal penalty of perjury that you are being honest with the court and with your spouse. And you'll go down to the next page. I will often add my certificate of service at the bottom, but you can also just provide a certificate of service as a separate freestanding document. There you go as far as what a financial declaration contains. The more effort you put into it, the better off you'll be, not only because you've given your spouse and the court, if that comes up, an honest and complete forthcoming statement of your income, assets, liabilities, debts, etc., but you'll also be better able to analyze your own financial needs and abilities, so that as you go forward with preparing for settlement, mediation, or even trial, you'll have a better idea of what your finances are. And if your case is dragging on, and typically a case can last anywhere between at least a year or longer if people are going at the pace subscribed by the courts, you can actually use this to budget better and manage your finances better as you move along. So I hope you found this useful. If for some reason you have any other questions, again, I can't dispense legal advice to people that are just trying to get answers to those legal advice questions without me being their lawyer who I represent. But if you want to ask some questions about what the rules require and what legal facts surround your financial declaration, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. It's Eric Johnson, Utah Family Law LC. Our phone number is 801-466-9277, and our website is divorceutah.com. My email is eric@divorceutah.com, or you can just send our general mailbox at info@divorceutah.com if for some reason a question comes up that this video didn't cover. And it can't cover everything, but I do hope it covered 90% of your questions that you have as you prepare your financial declaration. Best wishes.